Humanity has always hunted for knowledge in the unknown. The wonder is, not that the field of stars is so vast, but that we have measured it.
They say that Alexander the Great wept, for there were no more worlds to conquer. I suppose in our modern world such a saying is truer than ever before. Humans have settled in almost every continent and explored every corner of this world, but perhaps we can find a new world to conquer in space, also known as the final frontier.
Space, the final frontier.
For thousands of years, humanity has wondered what lies in the cosmos, what treasures and sights there are to behold. Such curiosities have led us to making assumptions about such things in the form of science fiction, which go all the way back to ancient Rome, with such epics as a true story by Lucian of Sammosta, a 2nd century story that involves aliens, interplanetary warfare, and starships, or modern day science fiction, such as Star Wars and Star Trek. However, in this video, I want to discuss one particular and recent entry into science fiction, and that is Starfield. Now, Starfield is the most recent entry by Bethesda and the imperate magnum opus of the director Todd Howard.
And throughout all that time, we'd often talk about and dream up the space game. What if we could take that feeling of being who you want to be and exploring a new world, but set it in space?
According to Todd, he wanted to make this game for decades, but couldn't due to the technology not existing in prior decades, such as the technology to have 100 loading screens within 1 hour of gameplay. Now, many people have already made hundreds of videos either praising or lambasting this game, and I plan to do the latter, but I won't be discussing the entire game, and instead I want to focus on one location, Akila City. Akila City is a distant city founded by humans on an alien world and serves as the capital of the Freestar Collective. Many have come to call this Cowboy City due to its western aesthetic. I assume that Bethesda may have been inspired by other media such as Red Dead Redemption or Firefly, but in true Bethesda fashion, they instead made a city that makes no sense and has no logic. A city that is supposed to be the capital of the 2nd largest power in human space, but instead looks worse than a 3rd world slum. A city that even makes the favelas of Brazil blush. So sit back and enjoy my ramble about why Akila City is a complete dump.
Oh, let's jump in and take a look.
Throughout history, all powerful nations and empires had a capital, a city that was the center of their government, culture, and economy. Cities such as Rome, London, Paris, Moscow, Tokyo, Babylon, and Constantinople, or Baghdad. The relevant governments of these nations will go out of their way to make the capital not only the best city in their country, but the best in the relevant continent. I'll use ancient Rome as an example. The city of Marvel at one point had 1 million residents. It was dotted with great temples, theaters, markets, homes, and of course the Colosseum. You also had the Forum, where the heart of the Roman government rested, as did some of its most splendid buildings and gardens. Trees dotted the walkways and stone roads covered much of the city. Aqueducts and roads enter the city at all corners, bringing much needed water and other goods needed to sustain such a large population. Now, this city was on Earth, for an empire that encompassed only a small portion of the world, a nation with relatively primitive technology and economics as compared to us today. So we would assume that a city of an interstellar power far in the future would be far greater than this. They would have access to greater wealth and resources. If Rome was a city of marvel, then Akila must be a city of gold, right? Well, let's take a closer look at the Starfield universe. In Starfield, we have a region known as the Settled Systems. This is an area of space that is either accessible or controlled by humanity, and in this space we have two main powers, the United Colonies and the Freestar Collective. The United Colonies is essentially the first interstellar government formed by humanity in 2159 and has New Atlantis at its capital. The UC is the supreme military, political, and economic power of the Settled Systems. They have an advanced economy that encompasses shipbuilding, resource extraction, financial services, medical services, leisure, and many other service industries. When you visit their capital, you are quickly reminded of their position. New Atlantis is an advanced, if not somewhat sterile city. The streets are clean, with businesses dotting on all sides. People walk freely with nice clothes and live in high-quality apartments. They have access to free public transportation, and monuments and cultural buildings dot the city. The mast building, which houses the government, is grand and one of the largest buildings in the city, a sign of the wealth and power enjoyed by this civilization. New Atlantis reflects the UC, a reflection of its wealth, culture, and technological prowess, a city worthy of its people. But the UC isn't the only power. For every Rome, there is a Carthage, and for every Britain, there is a France. And for the UC, you have the Freestar Collective. The Freestar Collective is a near power, a power that has managed to go toe-to-toe with the UC in 2 interstellar wars, a power that almost won said wars and gave the UC a run for their money. The Free Star Collective is like the UC in the sense that they also possess a large and diverse economy that includes medical and financial services, shipbuilding, interstellar trade, leisure, and many more. So you would assume that their capital Akila would also possess splendor and reflect their nation. Well, not exactly. So let's finally look at Akila itself, the third world of Starfield.
Behold Akila City, the capital of the Free Star Collective, a loose confederation of 3 distinct star systems. The city itself is home to a variety of people, but they all have one thing in common. They believe in the sanctity of personal freedom and individuality. Akila City is walled for a reason, and stepping outside those walls means facing the deadly Ashta, alien predators that are a cross between a wolf and a velociraptor.
When you land at the spaceport, you notice that there aren't a lot of landing spots. I would assume that the capital would be quite busy with starships coming in and out carrying goods and passengers, but I suppose it's not the strangest thing. As you leave the spaceport, you notice that the welcome sign Akila is just a wooden sign that seems to have been quickly spray painted on. But the strangest thing is that the pavement ends when you leave the spaceport. The entire walkway or road ahead is just mud. There's potholes everywhere, and I have no idea how the forklifts handle all this. When we head towards the city, we finally leave the mud and come to a wooden floor. Better than the mud, but this seems more like a temporary solution than a permanent road. When you finally enter the heart of the city, you notice that,
I can already smell the enlightenment and tranquility. This is wonderful, isn't it, Brian?
it isn't any better. There aren't any paved roads here either, not even in the literal city center. I mean, even the poorest regions of our world, the centers of the capital city are usually paved, at least to some extent. Not sure why the Free Star Collective wouldn't be able to do this, as many ancient civilizations had stone roads, and even medieval cities had cobbled streets. Now we do see stone streets in certain parts of the city, but they're quite limited, and only encompass a small overall area, and don't cover any of the main streets where all the businesses and traffic is. When you venture outside the city, there aren't even any dirt roads. For example, in our own history, the Romans built roads not only in their cities but also throughout their empire, from Britain in the north to Egypt in the south. Their road network still exists today, and many roads in Europe still follow paths laid out by the Romans. These roads allowed for easier and faster travel, not only for civilians but also for military forces that can more easily respond to threats. But in Akila, there aren't main roads in or outside the city. The entire city is filled with mud and puddles, and I wouldn't be surprised if the residents of this city just dumped their wastewater and feces onto the streets as well. I mean, could this be due to spaceship travel being so accessible that regular roads aren't needed? But even then, you at least don't want roads within the city, because I doubt you would want starships flying everywhere and filling the city with fumes and noise pollution. I mean, how do the citizens of the Free Star Collective even tolerate this? This faction is not poor or weak. I mean, if you travel to other Free Star cities like Neon or Hopetown, they're far cleaner and seem much more developed. Not sure why this city is even the capital. It'd probably make more sense for Hopetown and Neon to be the capital. At least those cities probably have toilets and running water. I mean, the sanitation and disease must be terrible in this city. I would suppose that Akila has an outbreak of plague on an annual basis. Building roads and keeping cities clean isn't just about the aesthetic, it's about public health, economic well-being, and just the quality of life. Okay, so the roads are complete garbage, but what about the buildings? Well, remember how I said in ancient Rome they had grand temples, government buildings, theaters, and the Colosseum? Well, Akila doesn't have any of that. Many of the buildings in this city are made of what appears to be stone and seem to be falling apart. And most buildings aren't more than 2 stories high. Some buildings don't even have proper roofs and instead use tarps. When you enter the city for the first time, the local bank is actually being robbed. The bank is right next to the police station. The fact that the robbers even felt confident doing this gives us the idea that public safety and respect for the law probably isn't all that good in this city either. As we travel through the city, we see the same situation. Old buildings of stone that appear to be falling apart. It's not even like there's a nice area. You know, like an area for rich citizens or a government sector. I mean, not every part of the city is supposed to be a slum. I mean, Ebside, which is supposed to be a slum from Neon, looks better than this entire city. Now, Neon is inspired by the cyberpunk genre, and that's known for its income inequality and poor conditions for most people. So if a cyberpunk style slum looks better than your city, then you're not doing too well. I mean, Ebside is actually clean and seems that sanitation is much better there as well. The game tries to make Ebb City seem like one of the worst places in the galaxy, but it's a jewel compared to Akila. In addition, the Well, which is a slum in New Atlantis, seems like a utopia as well. I guarantee if anyone in Ebside or the Well was offered to move to Akila, they would all decline, or commit Sudoku to avoid such a punishment. I mean, Akila seems like a place that you would exile criminals to, or your worst enemies, kind of how the British expelled criminals to Australia to deal with overflowing prisons back home. I suppose the elite classes of the city don't even bother living here. Maybe that might be the reason why the city is such a mess. The elites that rule maybe just don't care, as they don't have to deal with all this, and instead live in giant villas in other parts of the world, or perhaps reside in space. Speaking of the government sector, we do indeed have buildings that belong to major government institutions. You wouldn't notice because they blend in with the rest of the slum. You know, when you enter capital cities around the world, you can usually tell what the center of government is. When you enter Washington DC, you can tell that buildings like the Capitol and White House are centers of power just by their scale and the exquisite appearance. When you look at the Capitol, Westminster Palace, the Kremlin, the Paris National Assembly, or the Great Hall of the People, you can tell that even without knowing anything about these countries, that these areas are important and are symbols of the state. But do you wonder what the parliament equivalent of the Free Star Collective is? Well, the Free Star Collective has a board of governors, a council of a handful of people that rule the entire faction.
The ruling body that oversees the Free Star Collective and the Rangers. The council members are the political and corporate elite of the Free Star Collective, so we have to tread lightly when we're dealing with them.
Because for some reason, just 4 people are enough to rule an interstellar power. Now I know that each planet has their own local government, but even most federations usually have at least a couple hundred politicians to give everyone more representation at the federal level. Maybe I'll rant about the governments of this game in another video, because they're stupider than their capitals. Look at this picture. Which building do you think houses the Board of Governors, the Free Star equivalent of the executive and legislative branches, the center of their government? Did you pick this building? Well, you're wrong, because that's the headquarters of the Free Star Rangers, the federal police force of the Free Star. No, instead this tiny dinky building houses their parliament, an insignificant building that is smaller than most in the city. This building tells us nothing about their civilization or their power. Instead it looks like a DMV office. I wouldn't blame you if you walked by this building and thought nothing of it, and just thought it was a random store or house. The fact that the bar at the entrance of the city is larger, I think speaks volumes about their society. Another strange feature of the city is that it's encompassed by walls, like something you see in medieval or ancient cities. Historically, cities needed walls to protect them from foreign armies and raiding gangs. The world was far less stable and secure than today, and such dangerous conditions required a response. However, city walls began to fall out of favor in the 19th and 20th centuries as advancements in military technology began to make them obsolete. Walls protect you from armies armed with swords and shields with limited artillery, but in modern warfare, weapons such as missiles, artillery, aircraft, and in Starfield's case, spacecraft, can easily go over the walls and bombard the city. Walls could always be breached in history, but with modern ground troops and armors possessing heavy firepower, this task becomes even easier. So these can't be for defense against armed groups such as the United Colonies or Raiders. Could they be to defend against giant human-eating titans? Well, no. So what are they for? Well, it's because of the Ashta. The Ashta are a combination of wolves and velociraptors and are a dangerous predator on Akila. Yes, the entire city has giant walls because of literal wolves. If the Ashta are that dangerous, then why hasn't the local population been hunted to extinction or moved somewhere else? With the resources of the Free Star Collective, this shouldn't even be that difficult. Throughout history, governments would put out bounties on dangerous animals that were a threat to their citizens. But I suppose that the Free Star Collective doesn't really care to think ahead, and instead just builds walls. Walls will restrict the expansion of the city, because most people won't want to live outside of them due to the threat. This means that people will either overcrowd within the walls, or just move away, and thereby stunt the city's growth. To grow, the city will be forced to continuously spend more resources building newer and longer walls to protect everyone. Again, it would make more sense to remove the local population of Ashta through hunting or relocation. This will allow other communities to form nearby and increase the settlement of the planet. This would increase the population and economic development of this world and increase their standard of living. This whole plan is short-sighted and only a short-term solution. But maybe this policy might explain my next complaint, and that is the small scale of the city. When we zoom out and get a bird's eye view, we notice that the entire city is quite small. Perhaps the equivalent of 1 or 2 city blocks by our Earth standards. Again, I would be surprised if more than 1,000 people could reside here. Now, people will come at me and say this is because of the limitations of the game engines and that building a large city is impossible. But one way I would counter is that other games have created cities that felt large and did so with backdrops. These were 2D assets of cityscapes that were in the distance and usually didn't have a lot of detail. I think it would have made the city more impressive if Bethesda had followed that model. Add 2D assets in the distance for more buildings and blocks but make them inaccessible, like what we saw in other games such as Mass Effect. I mean, the open world already has many limitations, and I don't think that most would have minded one here. But currently, the city doesn't look like a capital city, and instead feels like some random small frontier outpost. I wanted to end this video by thinking about what the in-game lore reason could be to explain the current condition of Akila City. I think it's obvious that the Freestar Collective follows a libertarian form of small government, so maybe everyone just despises taxes. I mean, for a libertarian, taxes are the ultimate evil, and therefore no one is willing to pool their resources together to improve the city. No one wants to pay for roads or government buildings. Perhaps this is why Hopetown and Neon are far superior, because those cities are run by corporations who have the funds to improve their city from the revenue they generate in the free market. They don't have to rely on taxes, and perhaps have a profit incentive to improve their surroundings. But Akila, on the other hand, doesn't seem to have the financial significance of the latter two. This city seems to be entirely controlled and operated by the Freestar government, and therefore it gets a radically different treatment. Nobody wants to pay taxes for better streets, services, or buildings. They would instead live in little dirt and keep their money, which on Akila I doubt is a whole lot. An economic backwater like Akila probably has some of the lowest wages in the Freestar Collective. Usually in most countries, this isn't the case because the government usually extracts a lot of material resources from around their domain and invests it right into the capital. This is the reason why the capital is usually the biggest and richest city in any country. But of course, the Freestar most likely doesn't collect significant resources from around the collective. Because of their ideology and practices, the capital of Akila remains a small and poor city, the true dream of every libertarian in the world. Well guys, that's it for this video. This is actually quite different than most videos that I made before. I've always been big into video games, so I always kind of wanted to make one video that would cover such a topic, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys like it, I'll probably make more in the future. Anyways, if you liked it, please like, subscribe, and comment below, and let me know what you would like me to cover next. Thanks.